Great philosopher Biggie Smalls said, more money, more problems. In the real estate world, it's the other way around. More money, less problems. The more money you can save up, the more money you can accumulate for your down payment, for your closing costs, for all these other things as well, the easier it is going to be on you, right? The more you will have options, the more competitive you will be when you're being compared to other buyers in the marketplace. In order for you to feel safe or comfortable spending that kind of money up front or putting all of that hard-earned money at risk, the more you want to make sure that you are educated in understanding what you're doing. Welcome to episode 2 of the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we'll be discussing the question, how much money do you need to buy a home? Which is an incredibly difficult question to answer. It's the definition of a loaded question. You could line up 10 different buyers who bought homes at similar price points in the exact same neighborhood, ask them what they paid for that home or how much money they needed to buy that home, and you will likely get 10 different answers. It varies across the board. It depends on so many other factors outside of just that home. And so we'll be discussing how you can get some more accurate figures for your situation and the best way to plan and prepare, as well as pros and cons to certain options that you may or may not decide to use. The first thing that I will say is that you have to come up with a specific goal, right? It has to be a specific figure in mind when you are trying to determine how much money do you need to purchase a home. You can't just say, oh, I need to save up a lot of money or I need to save up a ton. That is not going to get it done. You are listening to someone who has had multiple different side jobs and part-time jobs over the years, over the course of my life. I've done a little bit of everything, right? I've worked at grocery stores, I've waited tables, done Uber, you name it. I've probably done something like it or something close to it, right? I've had all these different types of part-time jobs and stuff. And one thing that I definitely realized is that the situations or the times where I had a specific goal in mind, right, where I said, hey, I need to make this amount or I need to do this in order to be able to accomplish this goal or to save up for this particular item. The times where I had something specific in mind are the times where I hit that mark. But if you're just trying to save up a big pile of money, life is inevitably going to happen. That's when the flat tires come. That's when all the other things start to happen that start to chip away at that goal that you have or that pile of money that you're trying to stack up. And you just find yourself in that constant hamster wheel of trying to save up, and then it just keeps going right out the door. And so you need to come up with a figure in mind. It doesn't need to be down to the penny or anything like that, but it needs to be something that you have an idea or that you can at least see the light at the end of that tunnel as far as doing everything you can in your power to be able to save up for that particular item and get that set and ready for you to go. Side jobs are meaningless without a goal in mind, right? Like you said, even if you are doing it just to make ends meet, again, how much do you need to make those ends meet? You need to be able to answer those questions. And so think about that as you're trying to determine what type of money or how much money you should get in order to be able to purchase the home that you're looking at. So the next question we're going to focus on, okay, what's the number, right? What is that figure for you? What does that look like? We live in a society, we live in a world where we are all conditioned to not have the actual number, the actual figure ever presented to us up front. Right. When you go to the grocery store, when you buy something on Amazon, the price that you see posted is almost never the price that you're actually going to pay, because it never factors in service fees. It doesn't factor in sales tax. It doesn't factor in all these other items. Right. We are constantly, day in and day out, looking at the price of stuff that isn't actually the price of something. And when you are looking at what it's going to cost you to purchase a home, there's a lot of times where people will look at the numbers. They'll look at the down payment, right? They'll look at that item or what type of loan product they're using and say, oh, well, it's a 100% financing, so I should be able to walk away with money from this deal, right? I should be able to get it for free or not have to pay anything up front, right? I should be able to finance it completely and not have to bring any money to the closing table. That always isn't the case. And so you need to make sure you have a full comprehensive understanding of exactly what you're getting into and exactly how much it's going to cost. The best way to do that, the number one thing you should do, the first thing you should do if you're trying to figure out what that figure is for you, is there are two people you need to call. You need to call a local lender, right? Not a national lender, not a lender that is some big bank or that has some base out of a different state or some of the area. You need to call someone who is local, who knows the market in your area. Right? You need to talk to one of their mortgage consultants and get them to run the numbers on your situation, right? They need to run your credit. They need to look at your pay stubs. They need to look at all that different information to get a feel for, okay, what type of loan type do you qualify for? What type of interest rate do you qualify for? What type of down payment would you be looking at? They can tell you all of that stuff, but they need to be able to look up your information in order to be able to tell that. Like I said, it is literally different for every individual, and so you need to make sure you're talking with the lender, and then you also need to talk with your local realtor. Again, emphasis on the word local. Right? Don't call your friend who's a realtor in another state and ask them, hey, what do I need to save up to get this house or something, or this property in this area. They don't know that market. Right? What it takes to buy a home or what you need to have prepared up front to buy a home in Raleigh is different from what you need to buy a home in Wilmington or by the beach or in the mountains, right? There's different markets. There's different things that are expected up front. You don't want to just go into it blindly thinking that, oh, I got everything that I need or I have everything set to go based on a completely different market, right? Real estate is hyper local, which means that everything that is happening in that area can kind of be different. It's almost insulated in a bubble from what is happening in other markets or in other areas, even within the same state. So keep that in mind. Like, my real estate license spans the entire state of North Carolina, but I only will sell in the Triangle area because I don't know those other markets. And so I'm not going to try to venture out into that and try to give advice or information on it because I'm not an expert in those markets and what those typically properties are expecting or what they're typically getting in their deals. So you need to talk to both, again, the lender and the realtor. Do not look to mortgage calculators, Reddit threads, family and friends. You know, we always, when we're trying to figure out the price of something, I understand, right? I know most of you are probably thinking, like, if I want to figure out how much money I need to buy a home, I'll just get on Google, right? Type in how much money do I need, look at some forums, look at some threads, ask some friends, like, hey, how much did you have to pay? Again, they're all coming from a different situation, right? Their house was different. Their credit may have been different. Their finances, their salary, all of those things impacted how much money they needed. And so you can't always go off of what they are saying, even if they have the best of intentions in mind, right? If you go to your family and friends, there are things that they may not have had to do. The conversations I usually, when I meet with a buyer, to help prepare them for the home buying process, I'll usually walk them through, hey, here's how the market's looking. Here's how much money you will likely need to put up front in order to get a house under contract. Here's how much we're seeing for some of the different services such as inspections or appraisals. We have all those conversations and give them an idea of like kind of what they would need up front. The conversations that I've been having lately are completely different from the conversations I was having 5 years ago. Right? 5 years ago, I was telling people like, hey, you need to have about X amount up front to be able to get a house under contract. That number has risen significantly in today's market just to be able to have your name in the conversation. A couple years ago, if you were talking summer of 2021, we were seeing ridiculous numbers being thrown around. If a buyer came to me and they didn't have 5 figures, 20, 30 grand in liquid cash available up front, don't even bother. It didn't matter the price point. It didn't matter if it was a starter home or if it was a luxury house. If you didn't have 20 grand that you were ready to work with up front, you couldn't even get into the conversation. Now, fortunately, it started to calm down now, but it's still a competitive market out there, right? And so you need to make sure you're talking to that lender and that realtor to get an accurate idea of what you need to bring to that table. One thing that a lender can provide that is very helpful in this situation that I got myself when I was trying to figure out what I needed, is a lender can provide for you a loan estimate. Or more importantly, an itemized loan estimate. That's even better. And essentially all that is that it's a document that they can put together where they are giving an estimate of the different expenses and fees that you would have to pay to purchase a home. They can give a full rundown of, hey, on average, if you're looking at a house in this area and you're closing around this time of year and you're using these different services, this is about how much you could pay. Again, it's an estimate. They're not going to be able to get it down to the penny or the dollar, but it's going to give you far more insight than you would have if you were just out there just saying, hey, Reddit, what's a good number that I need to save up for a house? You want to have something that is specific to the area that you're looking in, and you want to also have a general idea based on what your income is, your credit is, all that stuff. You want to be able to tell, okay, exactly what type of monthly payment I'm looking at if you have a mortgage. You want to see what type that setup is. You want to see the down payment. You want to see how all those factors play into it. And so you want to get that information from the lender. They're going to be your best source for that. And then again, for the realtor, that's who you're going to go to figure out, okay, how much money am I going to need to have ready up front to be competitive in writing offers? And then also the realtor can also help you determine costs for maybe other inspections or other items that you may not have accounted for when you were talking with the lender. So it's really good to talk to both of them together because they can really give you a full picture of what you need to expect or what you can expect once you get into that process of purchasing that home. The down payment is different from closing costs. I don't know if any of you have heard that term before, but again, closing costs and down payment are two separate things. That is a very basic term, or that's a very basic concept in the real estate world, but there is a lot of confusion surrounding that whole concept, right? So again, down payment is different from the closing costs. The down payment is associated with the loan amount that you're getting, right? And so it may be a 5% down payment, it may be 10%. There are some options out there that offer a 0% down payment, no down payment at all, right? There are all kinds of options out there. That is associated with the loan amount. Closing costs are all of the other fees associated with purchasing that home and getting that loan. So closing costs is really like an umbrella term that covers a multitude of things. And closing costs, again, can be different depending on the person, right? So closing costs, they include some things that are required and some things that are optional. Closing costs are anything from the fee that the lender is going to charge you to service that loan. That includes the attorney fees. That includes taxes, whatever your portion of the taxes, the property taxes for that year. It can include any number of things, a credit report fee. There's all these different fees that get tacked in and thrown into there. And you want to be able to figure out, okay, what are those charges going to be and how does that factor into the down payment? If you are using a loan that has no down payment, you are still likely going to have closing costs associated with that, right? And so I don't want you to think, oh, I'm getting a zero, or there's no down payment, or there's no issue on that end that I have to worry about, so I shouldn't have to bring money to the table. You're still going to have to pay for closing costs. And so keep that in mind. I don't want people to be blindsided when they get into the process of seeing what they need to purchase and ultimately finding out that they aren't as prepared as they thought they were. As far as loan types are concerned, there are different types of loan types. There's conventional, you've got FHA, you've got VA, you've got all these different types of loan products out there. And depending on how it works, there's often going to be more red tape or more obstacles, I should say, or more hoops that you have to jump through for certain loans than you do for others. It just depends. And again, that's a great conversation to have with the lender so that you are prepared for how that looks, right? So FHA, you can often get a lower down payment associated with that, right? You can usually get like maybe as low as a 3.5% down payment with those options. VA, for our veterans, they have options where it is 100% financing, right? So you don't have to worry about a down payment, and they have a lot of other perks and advantages to it. Both of those are government programs, and so unfortunately, they usually take a little bit longer than just a regular conventional loan, but there is usually a little bit more red tape and kind of hoops that you might have to jump through for those particular options. But you always want to make sure that you have a full understanding of what is out there. There are also some other options out there. There's down payment assistance programs where you're not having to worry about bringing that down payment to the table if you will adhere to one of their other requirements or criteria, right? So there are some programs where they say, hey, we will pay your down payment completely, but you have to take this class, or you have to agree not to sell the home for the next 5 years, right? And that amount that we gave you slowly gets reduced each year, right? There's all different types of products and loans like that out there. You have to be able to weigh the pros and cons and figure out what's the best option for your situation. Whether or not it's good for you, it really does depend. The competition, right? Because remember, we're always looking at this from a competitive mindset. For a buyer, you are going to be competing against other buyers that are out there, right? And so you want to make sure that your loan doesn't make your offer look less advantageous to the seller, right? Because the seller, in addition to wanting the highest price possible, the seller also wants the buyer who's going to give them the least amount of problems, right? They want the least amount of hassle. They want the least amount of risk. And so that seller is going to be looking at whatever that buyer is using. And if a buyer is using 100% financing or they're using down payment assistance, they likely can't afford for anything to go wrong in that deal, right? And so if things start to go left, or maybe they find out during the transaction that they didn't qualify as well as they thought they did, or maybe the lender didn't do a good job of vetting them initially, anything like that happens, you want to make sure that they are a good one, right? And so a lot of buyers will need to take into account like, hey, if I'm looking at a competitive area and I'm using a loan type that isn't necessarily the preferred option in there, I may want to consider expanding maybe my search to see some other areas that I'm in, or I might want to kind of hold off and just save up a little bit more money. And that's where the conversation with your realtor can really come into play as well, right? Because you can talk to the lender and say, hey, I'm looking at this area. What are houses moving like in that area? How long is it typically taking for houses to sell? What's the competition looking like? Your realtor can help you determine that so that you have an idea whether or not the loan type you're considering is actually going to be an option for you to use, or if you're just going to be writing failed offer after failed offer after failed offer because you can't get a seller to accept your terms in a competitive situation. And so those are things that you need to keep in mind. I always explain to people, listen, when it comes to loans that have no down payment or have some type of assistance or have a feature in there that benefits you, if it was easy, everyone would do it. I think back to my family and I, we love donuts, right? We love going to Krispy Kreme when they have their free donut day. And I remember one year we went there, and we were going to go to this particular one that has a drive-through area and everything like that. And Krispy Kreme has one of the better free donut options that are out there, right? Most places they're like, hey, if you buy our specialty drink or spend at least $5, we'll give you a donut then. But Krispy Kreme, you just pull up, say, hey, I'd like my free donut. They hand you a donut and you drive off. It's the least hassle of all the options out there. And so we were like, hey, we'll go grab a donut, probably get some a little extra too. Figured it shouldn't be too crazy. I pulled up, The line on that Krispy Kreme, the line through the drive-through was wrapped around the building, out onto the street. It was stopping traffic. Parking lot was packed. Every parking space was filled. The lobby was filled. Everybody and their mother was there. And it was people from all walks of life, right? You had Audis, you had Beamers, you had Teslas parked in there, and you also had all the hoopty cars, right? Like there was no as semblance of any issues where it was oh man, this is just something that only the rich are taking advantage of, or only the middle class, or anything like that. No, it was everybody was there trying to take advantage of it. Everybody wanted that free donut, right? And that is how it would be. So if you imagine people who are willing to go through those lengths, right, willing to wait in those lines. We waited in that line for 45 minutes for a free donut. And I questioned myself every minute I sat in that line. If people are willing to do that for a free donut, imagine what they would do if a loan product out there was truly something where you could have no issues, no stress, no hoops that you have to jump through. You just got this 100% financing and you had no problems or issues with it. Everybody and their mother would be looking to take advantage of that. And that just simply isn't the case, because there's so many other things that you have to take advantage of, or you have to take into consideration. So keep that in mind when you're looking at those different loan products. Another thing to remember is you want to make sure you have some skin in the game to start ramping up your home equity. Right? You want to be able to build that home equity. Remember last week we talked about the number one advantage to owning a home is the ability to be able to build home equity. And when you have a down payment, you're already starting that, right? If you have 100% financing, or God forbid, if you have 100% financing and you're tacking on closing costs onto that loan, you're already starting off behind the eight ball, right? You're having to work even harder to start to pay down that loan. And if anything happens, right, where let's say you get your dream job offer, but it's in a different state and you have to turn around and sell it really quickly, if the market is not doing well enough for you to have made a profit off of that, you may have to consider being a landlord. You may have to sell it at a loss, right? There are all these consequences that can happen if you don't have any skin in the game up front. Unfortunately, with VA loans, I see situations all the time where military personnel are getting moved at a moment's notice. The market isn't doing well enough when they get moved, and they end up being forced into becoming a landlord. And so they have all these rental properties where they didn't necessarily want it that way, but they couldn't afford to get that property sold. And so they're just having to figure out how to do it. And so again, you need to make sure whatever loan type you're getting, if you're getting some type of advantage where they're paying for your down payment, so they're paying your closing costs, make sure that will not hurt you on the back end. Or if it does have the potential to do that, you're fully aware of it before you get into it. Those are things you need to keep in mind. Seller paid closing costs is another thing that you may often hear people talk about, where that's the seller is essentially offering like, hey, we'll pay $10,000 in closing costs, or hey, we'll pay $5,000 in closing costs. You might hear it in new construction as well, right? Where the builder says, hey, if you use our preferred lender, we will pay X amount in closing costs. Great option to use, but it's not something that you ever want to bank on, right? You don't want to save up or be getting ready to buy a home with the assumption that you will be able to find something out there where someone's paying something towards your closing costs. That it's great if that happens, but don't base your plan around that, because we don't know if that will still be available. Closing costs being offered by the seller is always dependent on the market. A couple years ago, when the market was crazy hot, there was almost nobody was offering any seller paid closing costs. Now that the market has started to cool off, we're seeing it being offered a little bit more now, right? You're seeing builders starting to offer it again for different features or to buy down the rate. It's always going to be dependent on what the market is doing, but don't ever make your plans of how much you need to save up for that home based on getting those closing costs from the seller. I would always make the assumption that you're going to have to pay those closing costs. They can vary all the time. I've seen sometimes where there may be 2-3% of the overall purchase price. It just depends. And again, it's different for everyone because there are some costs wrapped into there that are optional. So for example, a survey. right? If you wanted to get a survey on the lot that you're getting ready to buy, a survey is optional. It's highly recommended, but it is optional, right? And so that could sway your cost as well, right? There could be other items on there. Let's say if you wanted to get a particular type of rate buy down, or if you wanted to pay points on your mortgage, all of those things can factor into your closing costs. And so you want to make sure that you have an idea of what you're trying to get to, or the figure that you're trying to reach before you get there. The other thing you need to keep in mind is when you go to purchase that home, there is likely going to be some money that you have to put down up front. Sometimes it's a deposit. Sometimes it could be a fee depending on what happens in the deal. But there's often money that you're going to have to put up front to get a house under contract. And you want to talk to your lender and your realtor to determine how much of that is going to be. Because if that deal falls apart, there are a lot of situations where you could lose that money. North Carolina, for example, we have something called a due diligence fee. It's only in a handful of states. If in our state, if you pay that due diligence fee, well, I shouldn't say when, because nobody's going to accept your offer in this market without a due diligence fee. But in our state, if the deal closes successfully, that due diligence fee is credited back to you at the end of the deal. If the deal falls apart for any reason, whether it was your fault or not, you lose those funds. And so that is something that is a massive risk that can really change or impact the way you're looking at that deal. And it's important for you to have a full understanding of how that works before you ever even get into the deal. That may not be the case in your state. And so, again, this is why it's important for you to meet with your local professionals so you have an accurate understanding of what's at risk and how this all works. The great philosopher Biggie Smalls said, more money, more problems. In the real estate world, it's the other way around. More money, less problems. The more money you can save up, the more money you can accumulate for your down payment, for your closing costs, for all these other things as well, the easier it is going to be on you, right? The more you will have options, the more competitive you will be when you're being compared to other buyers in the marketplace. The more research that you do ahead of time, it's going to prepare you, right? The more money that you can accumulate, the more it's going to make your offer stand out from other buyers in the marketplace. And you want to make sure that you have the best foot forward when you're trying to get into that market. In order for you to feel safe or comfortable spending that kind of money up front or putting all of that hard-earned money at risk, the more you want to make sure that you are educated in understanding what you're doing, right? You want to make sure that you have talked with all the appropriate people. You have gotten accurate figures and an accurate understanding of where you stand so that you can be able to quickly move forward on whatever house you find, and that you're not stuck waiting or cautious or concerned or as worried because you know what's at stake. Again, no realtor can ever promise you a stress-free transaction. That is impossible because there are far too many variables out there. But if you have the knowledge and the education that you need to be able to make an informed decision, it's going to set you up in much better ways than you ever expected. So I hope that this has been helpful for you all. Again, the best way is to figure out the research, to sit down with people instead of trying to Google your way to an answer. It's always best to sit down with your local professionals to figure out where you stand and what you need. But it has to be specific. It cannot just be a goal of accumulating a big pile of money that is never going to work. You're going to be in a constant cycle of saving up and never quite getting to what you need. You need to come up with a detailed plan of action, and that is going to get you the best results and set you up in the best position possible. As always, I'll be here for you guys. If you ever have any questions, send in suggestions of what you want us to talk about in future episodes, and we'll always have some other things we want to discuss as well. But everything we do here is focused and dedicated to helping your home goals become a reality.